Life. I just ran out here to make this video, and I haven't even checked to see if I have a giant smudge on my face or anything. Actually, I was just in the house, and I thought I'll just run out in the garage and make a video real quick. And when I say the garage, I mean my office, which is in the corner of the garage. And I don't know what I'm going to talk about exactly, except life in general, that we all live lives that are rich and full of... I can't say that they're all rich in the same definition of rich, but all of us have lives where they are full of experiences. Even if we live alone in isolation and have a generally mundane life, we still have experiences. We still, even if we get our own food, we hunt. Even if all our food's brought to us, we have inner experiences. Because our minds tend to create whatever realities we need to suit us. So if we don't have enough excitement in our lives, we create many delusions and excitements within our minds. And in fact, there's a lot to be said about that when it comes to people who have a lot of hallucinations. There have been several stories of people who move out to the country, and after they've lived there for a while, they start to have a bunch of hallucinations, whether it be about aliens or, monsters or whatever it may be. Living in isolation tends to bring on delusions and hallucinations, but I'm not saying that there aren't crazy things out there that are real too. But what I was trying to get at that point was that those who have a really busy life and those who are constantly distracted and doing things tend to be very rounded individuals compared to those who isolate themselves. And I like to think of myself as a social person, but my socializing is through YouTube and through my family. And my family is the most important, and YouTube is just like a bonus of people that I feel like some of you are family and that I can talk to and have conversations with. I mean, I've learned a lot about knowing how to define the value of a person's opinion, but also not the value in the sense of yours is better than yours, but in the sense that, nor in the sense of I agree with you so it's true, but rather in the idea that none of us really know, and a mutual respect is important. I have conversations with people who are complete opposite of the way I think, but at the same time I don't really have a set in stone way of thinking. I do have my opinions about religion and somewhat about politics and about, society in general. And, I have certain thoughts about altruism, about kindness, about greed, about, murder, all these different things. And they're all my own opinions, and I realize this. Understanding, for me, the most important thing is to realize that all of our opinions about how life should be are based in what we've been taught, what we feel in our hearts, and what we feel intuitively. Now, intuitively is, I should say, our guts. Our gut is our intuition, and our hearts are different. The way that we feel about something. Our hearts are the emotional side, and that can be created by our life's experiences. In other words, you hear a song and it makes you really emotional. And that's maybe because that song was playing during an emotional part of your life. Now, most of you have probably had an experience like that. So, in other words, our heart can bring us to things that may not even be important. So if somebody that you don't know, let's say somebody is playing a song in the background of a video, and you take the video as a very emotional and serious video, but it's just because you relate to that song. And music is always used in, videos this way, which is why I don't put background music in my videos. Not to insult anyone who does, but it's just very distracting to me, unless it's very, very, very subtle and quiet. But inspirational music is fine if you're trying to convey a message, but in general, I prefer to hear the message carry itself, a message that's worth listening to. But we as humans attach to those sounds. We attach to things that move our emotions. So that's the heart part, but there's the gut part too. And that is the gut mind. Now, we have 90% of our serotonin is produced in the gut. Much of our dopamine, I'm not sure the exact amount of dopamine as well. Many of the same neurotransmitters, if not all of them, and probably DMT and all the other ones, are produced in the gut as well as the brain. And this isn't surprising because the gut is its own mind. It has to communicate with the brain. And it does so through the vagus nerve, and the vagus, and it travels up the spine. And back and forth, this nerve communicates the brain and the gut. And if you've ever had a stomach ache, or rather a headache, let's say, and you know you're going to puke, and it's a headache that tells you you're going to puke, and once you puke, you feel fine. Or vice versa. The stomach and headaches are very interrelated, and that's important for us, because evolutionary, we want our brain to know what is right to eat as well as what we shouldn't eat. I don't want to get into the details of that, but the point being that we are extremely complicated beings, and we have the way that we perceive the world and what we think is important is often based on our diet, or, you know, if we're hungry, we're going to feel emotional towards food. And I'm only saying all this as kind of a roundabout way to say that we have to be careful that we're not desiring something merely because our guts or our hearts want it, because much of the time our instinct, or what we might call instinct, or intuition rather, is based on past experiences. And I didn't always believe that, or never considered it, until somebody brought it up to me. And I was having a discussion about how intuition, you know, is our guiding principle in many cases, and somebody was saying, well, that depends on, you know, how your intuition was honed, and you know, he was saying that's not something you're born with, that's something you develop, and he's correct. You know, over time, you know, you learn things from people that you thought you had something figured out or understood the meaning, but it really does come down to semantics, and semantics just means wordplay. It's the way that something is conveyed through language. It can seem like a million different things. It's all words, and language is very limited for expressing ourselves. And being a family man, you know, I have my own opinions on things, but it's fascinating that so many different types of people. I can't relate to someone trying to relate to them how it feels to be a parent, but it's one of the most rewarding and one of the most frustrating things that a person could possibly do. Being a parent is very difficult, especially if you want your kids to grow up to be independent thinkers. And the less structured and determined, and let's say the less sure you are about what life means, the harder it is to raise kids. If you're a hardcore religious person in one way or another, and you'll convey that to your kids, and you will say, this is what God wants, and you better be this way. It says so in this book. But if you're non-religious, which a lot of people think that that's, you know, how could you not raise your kids with religion? And I'm just grateful that I don't, and I'm grateful that I didn't have it as well. Maybe I wish I would have asked some questions when I was younger, but I'm glad I didn't. I had my childhood, and my philosophy came later. But I met my wife when I was 23, and she had a son, and he was 3 years old. Raised him, and now I have a 5- and an 8-year-old as well. My other son's 22, and he's a philosopher. And our whole family is, you know, we're thinkers. We like to understand what life's about, but not for the sake of profit, not for the sake of knowledge itself, but for the sake of living a better life. We can change the way that we feel about things. We are the masters of our own lives completely, at least to an extent of how we want to feel about things. No matter how imprisoned you are, a majority of the time, it's a prison that you create. For those who feel like they live on a prison planet, or that they feel like they're oppressed or suppressed by the government, by other people, you can get yourself out of it most of the time. We know this. Not always, but picture a man who is poked and prodded and sitting in a cage in Vietnam for years on end as a prisoner of war, who's able to keep his mind together and keep it sharp. At the very least, sit there and pretend like you've been meditating the whole time. It's all about our perception, and that's what alchemy is. That's what mental transmutation is, of changing lead to gold, which is changing our negative thoughts into something positive. And for me, it's damn hard sometimes, because life can be difficult. It's not always roses and happiness, you know. I live in reality too. I can come out and make a video and find 10 minutes out of my day where I can be inspired enough to talk about something. But there's much of the day where I'm pacing, I'm doing my work in my office, and then I'm out thinking about something and thinking I should be doing this and I could be doing this. I'm human. We're all human. And the more we reveal that humanity, the more we see that we're not just robots in somebody else's delusion, and nor are we just actors in a play, you know? There's a word called sonder, which I heard. It's a more recent word, but it's the realization that everyone else leads a life as rich and as complex as your own, and that they're not all just actors in your play. And while that may seem obvious, many people seem to think that everyone else is just an idiot, or everyone else is deluded, or everyone else is better, or everyone else is worse. Everyone else is nothing. There is no everyone else. Every individual is a fucking individual. Pardon my language. It's so hard for people to grasp this reality. Just because two people agree on a political aspect doesn't mean they agree on a religious aspect. Just because they agree on the religious doesn't mean they agree on how to raise children, or how to lead their lives, or what's important. And all of us are trying to figure this out together. The most important thing is that we have empathy for other people. And that means understanding that things aren't so simple. Just because we were raised with something that we're grateful to have doesn't mean others were. You know, just because we had loving parents, perhaps someone else didn't. And for every abuser, you know, as much as I'd love to sit here and say that abuse is the biggest problem, which is something I wanted to make a video about, personal, physical and mental abuse of other people. It's appalling to me. And all this shit coming out in Hollywood right now, I won't even talk about it, because it's no surprise. There's always been abuse in Hollywood. There's been abuse in politics, in the higher echelons. People talk about, you know, the places like Bohemian Grove, where these leaders get together and they have these obscene, you know, sexual fantasies fulfilled, and all this. The world is a perverted place, hands down, and it's always been that way. All cultures have had crazy perverted sexual issues, as well as crazy angry violence streaks, and that's not going to stop just because we tell it to stop. But that's human nature. It shows something about people. The idea is to get past that and become better than, you know, needing to explore all of your craziest, wildest desires for the self-gratification if it's harming other people. There's nothing wrong with pleasure. That's great. Life is all about pleasure. Just don't you have pleasure at the cost of other people's happiness. And abuse being one of the biggest issues. Many people choose to be abused, and abusers love those types of people. But, you know, abuse isn't the biggest issue, but it's definitely something that is part of who we are. And there are abusers and there are victims, and people who play the role of the abuser well, and people who play the role of the victim like a complete professional. And the people who come home from work and say, you know, well, I had the worst day, you know, I had a flat tire this morning and that just ruined my day. Or the people who go on vacation for 2 weeks and come back and say, oh yeah, it was so fun, until I ran into this guy and he was just a total jerk to my kids or me. And there are a million different stories you can come up with the reasons people want to punish themselves by saying, I had the worst time. It's almost like they're guilty because they had a good time. Like, I've got to find some fault in this, because if I say I had a great time, then everybody will, you know, what? I don't know, feel that I'm like lying about it. You know, and there's the opposite issue where, like, the Facebook syndrome, where people post all these great things about themselves and people start to feel shitty about themselves because others are posting all these great trips to the Bahamas and everywhere else on Facebook. Well, they're not showing themselves sitting on the couch with a gallon of ice cream or all depressed the night before or whatnot. And that's the whole point of this that I'm trying to convey. We're all humans. No matter what a person is showing you, there is no elation without a little bit of sadness. And this is shown, obviously, in the way that millionaires are always seeking, you know, the next thing. Either more money or more power. Nobody seems to be just satisfied with being where they're at. And I think this is a condition of humanity. We're always searching for something. We're always looking to expand our stash for the winter, if you will. And once we recognize this, that's when we can start to use those old techniques that go back to ancient times of self-control and avoiding overindulgence, to use our knowledge as a tool to better ourselves. You know, and not to punish ourselves for being alive. Life punishes us enough without having to do it to ourselves. That's my opinion. And the more we realize that, it's a Zen type attitude where take it as it comes and life becomes much easier. But we will all still have those problems in life where we're not sure about ourselves, where we don't know where we came from or where we're going, and the hope to resolve that issue, is just one of those parts of being human. Looking back through history, nobody's solved it yet to everyone's satisfaction, so we just keep on yearning for something, whatever it may be. For me, it's just happiness, and I've found that that's most prominent in family, and in searching and in yearning and in sharing with other people, and doing the best I can in my time here. So, peace and love and all that hippie shit. I'll talk to y'all later.